Those people who had proclaimed Jesus as Lord and Savior but then commit suicide, are they truly saved, or are they like the seed that was choked out by the weeds and trials of life?
Well, that would depend on the individual. Some people who commit suicide are believers, and there is the eternal security of the believer, and they would go immediately into the presence of God, though the taking of their own life was a sinful act. Others who claim to be Christians would be like those who say, Lord, Lord, but do not know Christ, and then take their life, and rather than waking up in heaven, they wake up in hell. And so it would depend, did they truly know Jesus Christ in a personal saving way? And if they did, his sheep will never perish, neither shall any man pluck them from my hand. For my Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no man shall pluck them from his hand. So suicide in and of itself is not the unforgivable sin. Unbelief in the gospel is the unforgivable sin. So someone can commit suicide. If they're a believer, they would go straight to heaven. If they're not a believer, but simply a false convert who is deceived about their own relationship with the Lord, then they would go straight to hell forever. So but it's the same with anyone else. Do you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? Have you been born again from above? But once born, always born. You can never be unborn once you're born into the kingdom of heaven.
I did a funeral this year of a man I would call a friend. I knew him reasonably well, a member of the church, and he put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. And people's lives can be messed up. They can make reckless decisions, find themselves in really bad circumstances, and feel as though there's no way out. Unwilling to face the consequences of their actions, but they were believers, and they sinned. And it wasn't my job at the time to address was the suicide a sin. The question that I wanted to address as a pastor was, what am I going to say to his wife and his sons? And to be able to give them assurance. He was a believer. He professed faith. There was no question about that. And that suicide as an unforgivable sin is a Catholic doctrine. It is not a Protestant doctrine. And I think it's very important pastorally at that moment. Now, 6 months later, a year later, we may go back and address some of this with the family. But I think at the time of a suicide, it is very important, especially in the case of somebody who is a believer, and made to all, for all that we could see, made a credible profession of faith, but fell at the end. That was not the unforgivable sin. And I fully expect to see this person in heaven. And there is forgiveness for this too. And the blood of Christ covers all sin.